Do you use JavaScript? More importantly, do you use Node.js and Express? And you've always kind of wondered how you can get your file structure a little bit better on the back end and how you can actually make that work. So I'm here today to show you that. So today we have a newly made project that I'm working on, and usually on every newly made project, there's a couple things that I run through. So if you're new to JavaScript, or if you don't do this method, this is how I do it, how I organize my backend. But your file probably looks something similar like this. You have all your imports. Maybe you've imported Express, cores, .env for any .env variables, and then you have Postgres right here, maybe your database or something. And then you basically using all these, and then you have your middleware, and right here you have your routes. So maybe for you there'd be a lot more of these, right? Something like that. And you can kind of see now this is looks kind of clunky, and there's a bunch of stuff going on, and even if you make comments, it's kind of hard to really see what's going on. That's the whole purpose of this video. And then you would just have where you're listening for the server to start up. So what I've done is I've taken each part, like I've broken up this whole route into about, well, I've broken up this whole file into about 4 sections ish. So the first thing you want to do is create a server.js file, and you're going to want to import your Postgres, and you want to, this is going to come from another file, but we'll get to that. And then your .env, and this is basically where you're just going to, in this file, you're going to spin up your database connection to it, and you're just going to spin up a connection to the server. And then over in your middleware, you're going to import Express and any of your middlewares. So you're also going to import a router, and this will point to routes that are for specific routes. So I'll get to that here in a second. So you have your Express, you have your cores, and you're just going to initialize them down here. So we're going to say const app equals Express, and we're going to call that, and then we're going to use some middleware. So any of your middleware that you have would go right here, right? And then the next thing would be these routes. So we're exporting right here, exporting default this app. That's how we over here in the server.js file import it over here so we can use it to start the server. And then from middleware, we're gonna any routes. So let me just get Thunder Client and set it to the side. So this is a route right here. And as you can see, it's saying any routes that say /API/users, it's going to pinpoint me to this user route. And as you can see, we have a folder for all of these. So we have that middleware folder that contains this middleware file, and then we have the server.js, which is basically just in the main directory of that of your server. And so we're going to go over to the routes. We can create a routes folder, and then we're going to go to the user router. So if you had other routers, this is just an example. This is just for users. But if maybe you had like task, you would have a task router, and it would route all the different methods, meaning like your get requests, your post requests, your patch requests, your delete requests, all of those would get routed in this folder. So as you can see, I have a router.get, and the slash just means that since over here you stated that basically all your routes are going to start with a /API/users. All of those, anything that starts with that is going to go over to the user router. And I just control clicked on that. So I did like control, and then I hovered over and clicked, sends me to this file. So it sends it over to the user router, and what it does is you'll import Express, and we'll get to this line here in a second. And then we'll make something called a router, which you just say express.router, and it will create you a router, which basically just routes you to, it takes a route, and then it takes a callback function. So something that's going to happen when you hit this. So on that router, you can add methods that basically you could say router.get, and then if you wanted to maybe get something by the ID, you would do it like this. But in this case, we just want to get all the users. So it's going to stay the same as it is over here in the middleware. So it's going to be the same. So we're just going to add that slash. And we can also add, we can chain things, right? So we could do a dot post on this. If and only if the post has the same endpoint as the get or all the other requests. So we can say post and do the same thing because it has the same endpoint, and then we could say maybe add user, right? This is just fictitious, or not fictitious, but a fake, um, just a callback function, right? So I'm gonna show you where the callback function in this get is coming from. And so if we look right here, we're importing this from the controllers. So we make a controller folder and we add controllers based upon like what we're basically just kind of labeling them. So this is a user controller. So controller is just another word for like functions. So if you look right here, we're importing in SQL. And where do we establish SQL? Well, that's over here in the server.js file. If you look right here, we're saying SQL, and we're just adding export to the beginning of that. So now we can import it over in our user controller. So you could take this a step further, and you could add a queries file, and then you could add all your queries in there. But I don't like to do that, but some people do. This is just how I do it. So now in this function, this might look familiar to you, because if you look over here in this index.js, this is basically this whole part right here. That's what this is. And it's just made into a function and it's exported so that way you can import it into the user router, and that way it looks a lot cleaner. You can look and surf through here. So what we've done is we've taken all this and we've moved it into the server.js file. You look right here, move that over here, make it a little bit better, and we moved it into the server.js file. So basically all this, and then we've added um, middlewares, and we've moved that into the middleware. So if you look here, you can kind of tell that all the middlewares are basically just living right here. And middlewares are anything that kind of just hit before you hit an endpoint. So your server listens, and then you kind of listen for middlewares, and then you hit an endpoint. So this middleware right here is pointing to an endpoint right here. So this basically is the same thing as saying app.get. It's just broken up a little bit. So we're pointing, saying anything that has this endpoint, we're going to point to this router. And this is where that get part comes in. So you notice right here, get, get. So then, if this is a get request, or with a request with a method that of get, then it's going to pinpoint to this function. If I go hover over it, okay, I'm just going to go over to the file. I don't know why I'm doing that. And you can see here now we're in our controllers, and this is just the function called get users, which basically gets us all the users. So if you look, we sit in, and we get data back just like that. This is just some dummy data, and it comes back perfectly fine. So this is how I set up my backend. Just to recap, I'll go through it one more time. I make a server.js file, import all the .env, Postgres, and things to just kind of start the server up and connect to the database. Then I'll create a middleware folder and file, and I'll put all my middleware in there, and I'll create a middleware that points to a router. And then you're gonna have to make a routes folder and a router, and I'll create this router with express.router, and it will get whatever endpoint I'm trying to go to, and then you will go to this function. So then if we say get users and go over to this controller function, it will run this function right here. So they basically kind of just point to each other in like a line, right? Hit server listens for any request. It's incoming request. Hits the middleware if the middleware has anything to do with it. The middleware usually in this scenario sees that it has an endpoint of /API/users. Then it will send it to the routes, and the router will direct it to that controller function, and then the controller function will execute, and that's basically where everything gets sent back. In this case, all the users get sent back. So I hope you really enjoyed this video, and I hope I could understand, or I could explain this so that way you could understand the concept of how I set up my backend. And if that helped, I appreciate it. And if you want to know how you can authenticate your backend, basically meaning how you can give tokens and hash your password, well, I have a video about that somewhere up here in one of the corners. If you would just go watch that, I'll see you guys over there in that one. Peace.